I'm John D. Clark, attorney at law, and this is J. Clark Law, the channel. On this channel, I will discuss current legal issues of interest, the kind of issues that you want to know about. I will also answer your legal question. And since this is the very first episode of J. Clark Law, today I will discuss the first question that I answered on Facebook. But a friend of mine posted the question, I saw it, and decided to answer it. And once I did that, the thought occurred to me that this would be something fun and interesting to do, to set up this YouTube channel to discuss current legal issues of interest, and give you, the viewer, an opportunity to submit your legal question to me. And then I will answer it right here on the channel. But a friend of mine, evidently she was watching the news or reading the newspaper, and she came upon the story of Stephen Clark. Stephen Clark was a young black man. He was 22 years old. He was killed in Sacramento, California back in March of 2018. He was shot 7 times while in his grandmother's backyard by Sacramento police. The police said that they shot him because they thought he had a gun in his hand. However, the investigation after he was killed showed that he only had a cell phone in his hand. Despite these facts, the Sacramento prosecutor decided not to bring criminal charges against the police. But the family of Stephen Clark, even though the police were not criminally prosecuted, they brought a wrongful death lawsuit against the police that killed him. And in the news recently, there were some reports that the Sacramento police were offering to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 million to Stephen Clark's family for his wrongful death. So a friend of mine posted the question of, how is it that the Sacramento police is offering to pay the Stephen Clark's family $4 million when the Sacramento police were not even prosecuted for the crime? And so she posted that question, which is a fair question. I saw it and decided to answer it. And here's the answer to the question. First of all, you have to understand that our legal system has basically two tracks, 2 courts. One is a criminal court, the other is a civil court. In criminal court, the state or the federal government is bringing a criminal action against an individual, or it could be a corporation as well, trying to impose criminal penalties against them. Those penalties could be fines, probation, imprisonment, etc. However, civil cases involve everything that's not criminal. Civil cases usually involve your everyday disputes, contracts, injury cases, automobile accident. Anything that's not criminal is considered a civil case. And in criminal matters, the reason why the police oftentimes are not prosecuted is because criminal matters require a higher standard of proof. We call it proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And what that means is, if you took a set of scales, your garden variety supermarket scales, or the scales you have in your kitchen or wherever, and they're supposed to be evenly balanced. In criminal matters, the evidence that the state presents has to be so heavy that it tips the scales dramatically. The weight of the state's evidence pushes its side of the scale way down. We call that proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That can be a high standard. And what it really means is that the evidence is so strong, there is no reasonable doubt that the person is guilty. It's a high standard. That's fair. I mean, you want a high standard before you put somebody in jail or label them a criminal or give them a criminal conviction. That's how it should be. I've heard it said that under the law, the law would rather let 10 guilty men go free than to convict one innocent man. We don't want to convict innocent people. So the standard is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a high standard. The evidence is so weighted that it dramatically changes the scale. However, in civil actions, the standard of proof is not so high. It's only what we call a preponderance of the evidence. And if you look at those same scales again that are evenly balanced, In a civil case, all you have to do is present enough evidence to tip the scale just ever so slightly in your favor. And if you do, you win. That's called a preponderance of the evidence. It's been said if you take a set of scales and you sit a feather on one side and it tilts it just so much, that's the preponderance of the evidence. And so that's the standard of proof that applies in civil cases. And that's why these municipalities and governments may settle a serious wrongful death suit even though their officers have not been prosecuted or found guilty, because they realize that the standard of proof is much different. And while $4 million is a lot of money, it sounds like a lot of money, these municipalities are guarding against the fact that if they went to trial and a jury believed that the killing was wrongful, that a jury could award $20 million, $25 million, $40 million. So they pay these settlements not only because they know the standard of proof is different, but they pay it to avoid potentially larger verdicts that they would have to pay out. The Stephen Clark case, it's a tragic case. I'm not anti-police. I have a lot of friends in law enforcement. I know there are a lot of good law enforcement officers. There's some bad ones, but there's a lot of more good law enforcement officers. My dad was in law enforcement, so I'm not anti-law enforcement. Some people always criticize law enforcement until they need them. And when you know, they always have something to say about law enforcement, but then when they need them, they call them and they want them to come. So we got a lot of good law enforcement people. And the point I'm getting to is that these men and women, they have a job to do. They're in a lot of dangerous situations where in the snap of the finger, you know, their life could be ended. They won't go home to their family. So the law only requires them to act reasonably. They don't have to be perfect. And even though the young man only had a cell phone in his hand, I don't know what they thought. I don't know what he said. I don't know what, but perhaps the reason why that they weren't prosecuted is because the district attorney felt that under the circumstances, they reasonably believed that he had a gun. They don't have to be perfect. If they reasonably believe that, then they have the right to act. But it was tragic that he was killed. But again, getting back to the point, in civil cases, there's a different standard of proof. So preponderance of the evidence. In criminal cases, there's a much higher standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's your answer. That's why municipalities, governments, cities, counties, that's why they pay out judgments sometimes in these cases, even when their officer hasn't been convicted, because the standard of proof is different. So you asked the question, and now you know the answer.